Welcome back. My name is Sheldon McLeod. This is Thinking Out Loud, presented to you here on the SaltWire Network, home of the largest independent digital audience in Atlantic Canada. And I truly appreciate you spending some time with us. Don't forget to go and search out our new YouTube channel, a place for you to see some of the other great work my colleagues are doing. And it used to be an old joke that everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does a darn thing about it. I guess you can make that same joke now. It's not so funny that everybody's talking about the climate. And now we're looking at what we can do to address this. In fact, the province of Nova Scotia put out its climate risk assessment, and it is, ostensibly saying that Nova Scotia is getting warmer, that precipitation patterns are changing, Nova Scotians are experiencing more frequent and intense storms, sea levels are rising, the oceans are changing, and there's a lot to look at and go through there. Now, there's also a story that my colleague Aaron Beswick has written about this, and he includes as well some of the infographics that were in that report. Rising sea levels, storm surges, and this is all by the end of this century, 2100. That's 30 some or 70 some years away, but just think, some kids born today will be living to this and through this. More warm nights and hot days, and talking about the winds and oceans and storm tracks and how that's going to affect hurricane season, and of course precipitation, more snow than rain, and all of this to go, well, you know what, when it's a plan to talk about dealing with the climate. We live in mostly an island community. It's a peninsula, yes. Will Balser is the Coastal Adaptation Coordinator with the Ecology Action Centre. He joins us now. And Will, thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
I suspect that you were asked or tasked with this because of its potential impact on our coastal areas. What did you see in this report? Did it align with what you know about what the experts are saying about climate change?
Absolutely, and especially where they talk about and highlight the seriousness and sort of approaching climate issue that we're going to be having with flooding coastally or inland. And that's sort of the most pressing issue that they're going to see by 2030, because we're already seeing that becoming an issue every year, especially every spring or every hurricane season. You don't have to go far to find Nova Scotians affected by this.
And when people ask you, okay, what's the difference between weather and climate, what do you tell them?
I think the big thing is weather is what you feel day to day, but climate is what you think of, last November or the November before that, or maybe your grandparents' Novembers and the way that they describe winter coming on, or maybe the storms that they remember when they were children. So it's sort of something that can be measured within a human lifespan, especially now with the rapidity of change that we're seeing. But, day to day, it is hard to recognize those changes sometimes.
Now, this is, obviously addressing or looking at what will or might potentially happen. And again, the response is expected later in the week. Do you feel that this encapsulates, and I know I asked you about what the experts are telling you, but does it put enough, does it focus enough on the serious nature of what this is? Does it give enough detail in your mind about what we could or should be doing to mitigate the potential harms or risks?
Mm-hmm. Two minds on that. One, and the report identifies this as a knowledge gap and as an area of further research, but the whole sort of conversation around climate grief and the loss of community spaces and common spaces through destruction of erosion and storm events, I think that we're going to see some really severe and deeply traumatizing human and societal impacts from climate change as it really starts to ramp up locally and globally. And that is an area that is really understudied and I think undervalued when it comes to our style of adaptation. We focus a lot on infrastructure.
And we talk infrastructure, that also encapsulates planning and where we build, and perhaps what we do with the spaces that we've built over the last 100 to 200 years. So again, rising sea levels by 80 years, it'll be up potentially 3 or 4 feet. That's, just look at the Halifax waterfront. Some of it would be safe, but potentially some of it will not. Does the planning part of this get enough attention from your perspective?
I think that we've gotten an awful lot of good attention on what development should look like in the future through the development of the Coastal Protection Act from the province, and hopefully we'll be seeing that in early 2023. And that does something, first of its kind in Canada, that we have that kind of provincial development legislation. Second of all, it does an excellent job at preventing new development from occurring in risky areas and having those sort of on-site assessments of the potential risk that you need to mitigate by staying further back and higher up. Unfortunately, what it fails to address is the location of septic systems and wells, which is a big part of a development. Hard to have a cottage without a septic system. And the other big one is all of the hundreds of thousands of existing residents in coastal areas in low-lying and risky places, even in HRM here. So I think we need sort of a Coastal Adaptation Act to follow, or a Coastal Protection Act 2.0 to follow this. Again, it's an excellent first step, but we need to start addressing existing infrastructure and communities.
And when a government starts saying, well, we need housing inventory because of the crisis of today, looking down the road, well, that's, we want to address needs that are happening or exposed to, our communities now. And I have to wonder, are we boiling frogs? Are we just sitting back and watching it as everything starts to move towards an end that we're being told, but we just really don't believe?
I think that we're in a situation now where, and again, especially with coastal development and coastal communities, we're in a situation where those communities are at risk of destruction, whether or not we plan a move or sort of plan a managed retreat. We're already seeing, houses literally being washed into the ocean, or houses being severely threatened, waves slapping at the decks. So we're in a situation where we have to act. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a very unfortunate place. And some of that action might look like a managed retreat or a planned movement of a community. But like you identified, overlapping crises here. During a housing crisis, it doesn't do anyone any favors to just say, right, well, your house is at risk and you need to leave, without having an answer of where they're supposed to go. Again, we're already facing a housing crisis. It doesn't behoove us to further that issue without having a decent answer.
Could always find someone who will disagree, but what's your sense on the agreement about what's laid out in this? It's the same question I asked you earlier, but, the idea that for the most part, the government is putting forward its plan to deal with this. And those folks, do you see a convergence of facts? Are we all seeing the same point on the horizon here?
I think that there's an agreement on the facts. I think there's always going to be disagreement on exactly what we do to get there. And that's why I really look forward to tomorrow's climate plan. We have an awful lot of good information now from this report. We have really good targets set by our emission standards from last year. We just need to see the road that take us to those goals and hopefully take us to a well-adapted future. And that's why I really look at this plan, or this risk assessment, as related to the climate plan. They're sort of intertwined.
And we're also seeing that I'm thinking of flooding in Cape Breton, that infrastructure, the ditches and culverts were not necessarily engineered for what's happening, never mind what might happen. I think that's another plan. Are you seeing action there from municipalities and governments where they're taking that into account?
I think a lot of climate plans that are coming out of municipalities and other provinces do take infrastructure into account. But when you take, stock of your existing infrastructure and look at some of it, even our dike systems here in Nova Scotia being over 400 years old in some cases, it's a lot of money to talk about retrofitting that. And if there's not the funding to, renovate or retrofit or adapt our existing infrastructure to it, then we're sort of just crossing our fingers and hoping it won't hit this area particularly bad. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And so I think there needs to be, not just a commitment towards doing something about it, but we need to see the actual financial pathway to how you're going to update our infrastructure or modify our infrastructure, or at least, have adaptations built into new infrastructure.
Will, you're the Coastal Adaptation Coordinator with the EAC. Are you an optimistic guy? Are you a glass half full, glass half empty, or I'm curious as to what your outlook on life is, given the work that you're doing and the information that you're asked to provide?
Well, certainly working with policy and multiple levels of government, it is very easy to feel like sort of slogged down or like you're rolling a boulder up a hill. But I look at the history of human development and settlement in the Maritimes over tens of thousands of years and recognize that, we as a species are extremely adaptable to rapidly changing climates and traumatic climate events. Obviously, we carry some of those with us through trauma and sort of our relationship to the shoreline. And I think that's really the faith that I have, is that we have adapted our way out of changing climates before, and we always have an opportunity to change our relationship to the shoreline and to our ecosystems.
what was that Jurassic Park line? Life will find a way, even if you're not expecting it to obviously this is a little joke, but it's a serious thing, and clearly we're going to be watching as well what government does. Anything else, Will, that is on your horizon that you should think that we should know about?
I think just, paying attention to your local shoreline and paying attention to your local ecology and ecosystems is extremely important. No one knows the exact impact of climate effects or hurricanes or just seasonal change that you see better than the people who have a very intimate local relationship with that environment. And the changes are so localized, even along the Northumberland shore, beach to beach, cove to cove, to hit very differently and change sediment very differently. So the more that you can take pictures and catalog these kinds of things, even in your own head, when someone comes in and says, we have a panel discussion, what's climate change look like in your area? You can have the pictures, you can have the timelines. No one's going to be able to provide better detail than you.
He is the Coastal Adaptation Coordinator with the Ecology Action Centre. Will Balser, it's a real pleasure to have some of your time today. I appreciate this.
Excellent. Appreciate it very much.